The late afternoon sun painted Redstone Creek in streaks of gold and orange, dust swirling in lazy spirals along the boardwalks. The town saloon, the rusted spur, hummed with a low thrum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional burst of raucous laughter from gamblers at the far end of the room. Eli Boone leaned against a weathered doorframe, hat tilted low, boots scuffing the creaking wood as he watched the scene with quiet, measured patience. He wasn't used to the kind of attention he drew. The curious glances, the whispers trailing behind him like tumbleweeds. In Redstone Creek, everyone had a story, and Eli's was written in callous hands, tanned skin, and a life carved out of mountains and solitude. He rarely ventured this far from his cabin in the foothills, but today he had business, though not the usual kind. Clarissa Montague, the richest woman in town by far, sat perched in a high-backed chair at the far end of the bar, a glass of amber whiskey cradled delicately in her hand. Her dress, white as fresh snow, contrasted sharply with the grime-streaked wooden floorboards. She had the kind of laugh that could cut glass, sharp and lilting, full of amusement at the expense of anyone who dared cross her path. Eli didn't have to wonder what, or who, had caught her fancy. "You? Build a cabin," she called across the room, her voice carrying over the piano's low notes and the shuffle of cards. The patrons leaned in, curiosity flaring like sparks from a campfire. "Oh, Eli Boone, you poor, stubborn man, do you even own a hammer?" Eli straightened, jaw tightening. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve, letting the sun catch the dust on his shoulders. His voice, rough as gravel and low, carried easily across the room. "I own 2 hands, and to know how to make them work, ma'am. That's more than enough." Clarissa's laugh rang again, bright and incredulous. "2 hands? You'll need more than that if you hope to marry me." She leaned back, eyes sparkling with mischief. "Build me a cabin in the mountains, Eli Boone. A proper one, mind you, with walls that stand and a roof that doesn't leak. Do that, and maybe, just maybe, I'll consider your offer." The room fell into a hush, the murmur of conversation dimming as everyone turned to see how Eli would react. A coyote's distant howl drifted over the hills, blending with the wind, rattling the saloon's weathered shutters. Eli's hand drifted to the hammer strapped to his belt. A simple gesture, but one loaded with promise. "I'll build it," he said, voice steady, though his heart thumped like a drum in his chest. "And I'll do it right, Clarissa Montague. When I'm finished, you won't be laughing anymore." Her eyes widened in surprise, a thrill of challenge sparkling in them, the kind of challenge that she had thought no man could ever dare meet. For the first time, Eli saw a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even respect, behind her practiced amusement. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dusty street outside, and in that golden light, Eli Boone and Clarissa Montague locked in a silent contest of wills, a game that promised sparks, tension, and a fire neither of them yet realized would consume them both. The morning air was sharp with the scent of pine and dew as Eli Boone swung his leg over the saddle and nudged his horse forward. The town of Redstone Creek shrank behind him, dusty rooftops fading into the heat-haze horizon, leaving only the endless expanse of mountains and valleys ahead. Every rock, every twisted juniper, seemed to challenge him to prove his worth. He had accepted Clarissa's laugh as a challenge, and now the real work began. The journey was grueling. Loose stones threatened to send him tumbling, and the weight of his supplies pressed against his back. The sun climbed higher, bleaching the landscape into shimmering shades of gold and copper. Yet, in the solitude of the wilderness, Eli felt alive in a way the saloon and town gossip never allowed. He measured each tree he felled, each beam he split, his muscles straining with effort, his breath coming in sharp bursts. By mid-afternoon, he paused atop a ridge, wiping sweat from his brow. Below him stretched the valley he had chosen for cabin, a flat stretch of land surrounded by jagged cliffs, with a creek winding like a silver ribbon through the center. This was untamed country, unforgiving and wild, and yet it called to him like no town ever had. He let his hands rest on the reins and closed his eyes, imagining the cabin rising from the soil, each log placed with care, a home built by his own blood and sweat. A sudden voice broke his reverie. "You're taking your sweet time, aren't you?" Eli's eyes snapped open to see Clarissa perched on a rocky outcrop, a small smile playing on her lips. Her dress, now more practical for travel yet still elegant, flapped in the mountain breeze. She had ridden alone for hours, her determined face streaked with dust and sunlight. "I'm pacing myself," Eli replied, his tone clipped but not unkind. He dismounted, boots crunching on gravel, and squared his shoulders against the wind. "This isn't something to rush, ma'am. A cabin needs to stand for years, not just for a sunset or a laugh." Clarissa laughed, a softer, warmer sound than the one in the saloon. "And here I thought you'd be done by now, so I could scoff at your mountain man's skills." She tossed a glance down at the valley below. "But I have to admit, seeing you out here, working like that, it's impressive, infuriating even." Eli's lips twitched in the corner of a half-smile, but his eyes softened as he studied her. "You'll see, Clarissa. I'll build it all, the walls, the roof, the chimney. And when it's done, you'll have no choice but to admit a man can do more than swing a hammer in a saloon." For a long moment, they stood together in the quiet majesty of the mountains. The creek babbled below, birds wheeled against the sky, and the distant howl of a coyote carried across the ridge. Tension and unspoken curiosity passed between them like a current, delicate yet undeniable. Eli felt it, a spark igniting in his chest, one that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with her presence. This refined, daring woman who challenged him with laughter and yet had somehow become a constant in his thoughts. With a heavy breath, he turned to the valley below. "Then let's get to it," he said, rolling up his sleeves and gripping his tools. Clarissa followed, boots crunching on the gravel, hair catching the sunlight. Together, they descended into the wilderness, where sweat, labor, and quiet glances would begin to forge a connection neither expected, but both would soon crave. The sky over the mountains had turned a bruised purple by mid-morning, clouds thickening with the promise of a storm. Eli Boone's hands were raw and blistered, gripping the axe as he swung through stubborn logs with a rhythm born of years in the wilderness. Sweat dripped into his eyes, stinging, and he cursed softly under his breath as the wind picked up, rattling the unfinished beams of the cabin. Each strike was heavier than the last, each movement a test of endurance. And yet Eli felt alive, the challenge burning in his chest as clearly as the blood rising to his cheeks. Clarissa Montague approached cautiously, boots sinking into the damp soil, hands gripping a small bundle of supplies. Her hair whipped around her face, caught in the wind, but her eyes were sharp, scanning every log, every corner of the half-built cabin. "You're working yourself too hard," she called over the rising wind. "If you collapse, there won't be a cabin to speak of, and I'll be forced to laugh at your ruin." Eli wiped his brow and shot her a look, one eyebrow raised. "Collapse?" he muttered, voice low and steady. "Clarissa, this cabin isn't going to build itself. You're welcome to swing an axe if you're so worried." Her laugh, sharp and mischievous, cut through the wind. "I wouldn't dare. But you're stubborn as a mule, and I can't help noticing how impressive that stubbornness is." She stepped closer, and for a moment the wind softened, as if giving him a breath of quiet amidst the storm. Thunder rolled across the valley, low and threatening. The first drops of rain began to spatter against the earth, darkening the dusty soil. Eli's jaw tightened. "Then we'd better finish this section before the storm makes a mess of everything." They worked together, side by side, the cabin slowly taking shape beneath their hands. Clarissa's refined manner clashed with Eli's practical efficiency at every turn, her careful measurements, his instinctive corrections. But beneath the bickering, a rhythm emerged, each movement a subtle conversation, each glance a spark of unspoken understanding. A sudden crack split the air as lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the valley in stark white. A section of timber shifted under the wind's pressure, threatening to topple. Without thinking, Eli lunged forward, catching it just in time, his arm brushing Clarissa's. She stumbled slightly, heart racing, and he steadied her with a firm hand on her elbow. Their eyes met, hers wide with surprise, his steady, unwavering, full of silent promise. "You've got a death wish, mountain man," she said, breathless, though the tremor in her voice betrayed more than fear. "Just keeping you safe," he replied quietly, eyes lingering on hers longer than necessary. The storm raged around them, rain pelting their faces, but in that instant, the world narrowed to the two of them, bickering, laughing, surviving, and maybe beginning to care more than they were willing to admit. By dusk, the storm broke, leaving the mountains glistening under a pink and gold sunset. Mud streaked their clothes, hair plastered to their faces. But the cabin stood solid and proud. They collapsed against the timber, breathing hard, laughing despite the exhaustion. Eli glanced at Clarissa, seeing the flicker of awe and something gentler, something dangerous and thrilling in her eyes. "You did it," she murmured, brushing rain from her cheek, her voice almost shy. "I didn't think anyone could." Eli shook his head, smirking through the dirt and sweat. "I told you, a man could do more than swing a hammer in a saloon." And as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, both of them realized that this cabin was more than a challenge. It was the beginning of something neither had expected, something wild, untamed, and entirely their own. The mountains were bathed in gold as the sun began its slow descent, streaking the valley with long, fiery shadows. The cabin now stood complete, a testament to sweat, splintered hands, and stubborn determination. Eli Boone leaned against a rough-hewn porch railing, boots dusted with dirt, eyes tracing the curve of the creek below. The wind carried the scent of pine, wet earth from a morning rain, and something else, something subtle but intoxicating that made his chest tighten whenever Clarissa was near. Clarissa appeared at the cabin steps, hair catching the fading light, the fabric of her skirt brushing against the timber. She carried a basket of food, her careful elegance still intact even in the wilderness, though dirt smudged her cheeks and sweat gleamed at her temples. Her sharp eyes softened as she studied the man who had turned her challenge into reality. "You really did it," she said quietly, setting the basket down. Her hands lingered on the rough wood for a moment, as if grounding herself in the proof of his labor. I didn't believe you could." Eli shrugged, brushing his palms against his trousers. "I told you, I don't work for praise, Clarissa." His voice was rough, but there was a warmth there, a quiet pride that didn't need boasting. He glanced at her, noting the way her eyes followed his movements, the way the fading sun gilded her hair in gold. "You didn't just build a cabin," she said softly, stepping closer. "You transformed this place. And me, maybe." Her voice faltered slightly, the bravado of their first meeting giving way to something fragile, honest. Eli's gaze softened, and he took a step toward her. "You think you can tame the wilderness, but maybe I'm the one who's been tamed." His words hung between them, charged, as the mountains echoed with the distant howl of a coyote. The sound, wild and lonely, mirrored the tension spiraling between them. Clarissa smiled, a flicker of something daring in her eyes. "You're impossible," she said, though her voice trembled with an emotion she didn't dare name. "I came up here thinking I'd see a stubborn man swing an axe. Instead, I find this." She gestured to the cabin, the valley, the quiet beauty of the moment. And to them, standing close, hearts beating against the pulse of the land, For a long silence, they watched the sun slip behind the ridges, painting the sky in streaks of rose and lavender. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain, pine, and wildflowers from the meadow below. Eli's hand hovered near hers, almost touching, drawn by an invisible pull neither had the courage to name. Finally he spoke, voice low and intimate. "Clarissa, staying here with me, it's not a joke, not a challenge. Us, it could be something real. If you'll let it." Her breath caught, heart racing, and she stepped closer, brushing her hand against his. I think I want to be," she whispered. Her gaze met his, raw and vulnerable, the playful arrogance of the town woman replaced by a woman willing to risk her heart. The mountains held their breath as Eli drew her hand into his. The first tentative touch promising trust, tenderness, and a dangerous thrill of something neither could resist. The cabin, the labor, the storm, they were all gone now, leaving only two hearts beating against the rhythm of the untamed west. As the sun finally sank behind the horizon, leaving the valley in twilight, Eli and Clarissa stood on the porch, hands entwined, realizing that love, like the mountains, was rugged, wild, and breathtakingly worth the risk. The morning sun glared off the cabin's roof like a warning, turning the valley into a wash of gold and shadow. Eli Boone tightened the leather strap on his satchel, the weight of the tools within a comfort he knew well. The quiet of the mountains that had seemed so peaceful only yesterday was shattered by the distant clatter of hooves on the rocky trail. Clarissa emerged from the cabin doorway, her dress now tucked into practical riding pants, boots laced tight. Her eyes, usually sparkling with amusement, were sharp, alert, and calculating. "They're here," she said softly, nodding toward the dust rising at the far end of the valley. Eli's jaw clenched. A group of men led by a land developer from Redstone Creek were riding hard, intent on claiming the valley and the cabin Eli had fought to build. Guns glinted in the morning light. The stakes weren't just about land. They were about pride, survival, and the fragile trust he had cultivated with Clarissa. "Stay behind me," Eli said, voice low and steady. "They won't take this land without trouble, and I intend to be trouble enough for them." Clarissa stepped closer, hand brushing his arm. "Eli, don't. You've already risked so much. Maybe we can talk them down." He shook his head, eyes narrowing as the riders approached. "Talking doesn't work with men like this. Only action does." The first horseman spurred forward, and Eli's hand hovered near the rifle slung over his shoulder. But before the tension could snap completely, Clarissa drew herself up, her posture straight, unwavering. "Stop," she called, voice ringing out over the valley. "This land is not for sale. Leave now or face the consequences." The leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "And who are you to say that, little lady? This is business. Gold talks, sweetheart." Eli stepped forward, shoulders squared, boots crunching against the gravel. "I'm the one who built it, and she's the one who owns the right to decide. If you touch this place, you'll answer to both of us." The air crackled, tension stretching taut between the two sides like a bowstring. Dust whipped around the valley as the men hesitated, sizing up the mountain man who had not only built a cabin in impossibly wild terrain, but now stood ready to defend it, and the woman who had dared laugh at his challenge. A shot rang out, echoing off the cliffs. Eli's rifle barked in reply, the bullet kicking up a spray of dirt as it missed the aggressor but sent a clear message. Clarissa pressed herself against him, heart hammering, and he wrapped an arm around her, steadying her. "I won't let them take what's ours," he murmured. For a tense few moments, it seemed the world might explode into violence, but then the leader gave a slow, grudging nod. "This isn't worth our lives," he muttered. One by one, the riders fell back, leaving a swirl of dust and a lingering threat hanging in the air. Clarissa exhaled, leaning into Eli's side. You did it," she whispered, voice trembling with relief and something deeper. Eli's lips brushed the top of her head. "No," he said softly. "We did it. Together." His hand lingered at the small of her back, holding her steady against the adrenaline and fear. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the valley, turning the cabin's walls into a warm amber glow. For the first time since the challenge had begun, Eli and Clarissa allowed themselves to relax. The danger had passed, for now, and in its place was a fragile, exhilarating intimacy. "I think," Clarissa murmured, tilting her head up, "that I've underestimated you and maybe myself." Eli's grin was slow, teasing, yet full of unspoken emotion. "And I think," he said, voice roughened with sweat and determination, "that this mountain man isn't finished surprising you." As twilight settled over the valley, they stood together on the cabin porch, hands entwined, hearts racing, not from danger, but from the undeniable pull of love forged in sweat, courage in the wild, untamed West. The morning dawned crisp and clear, the mountains glowing with the soft pinks and golds of first light. The cabin, now sturdy and complete, stood proudly against a rugged backdrop, its timbers warmed by the sun and weathered by wind and rain. Birds called across the valley, and the distant sound of a creek gurgling over stones added a gentle rhythm to the world that had finally grown still. Clarissa stood on the porch, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The wind teased her hair, and for the first time since arriving in the valley, she allowed herself to simply breathe, to take in the beauty, the danger, and the man who had changed everything. Eli Boone emerged from the cabin, shirt dusted with sawdust, sleeves rolled up, and eyes bright beneath his weather hat. He carried a bundle of freshly cut firewood, each log swung with effortless precision, each movement speaking of strength and care. "You didn't have to fetch the wood," Clarissa said, though her voice held no reproach, only warmth. Eli shrugged, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Some things are better done by hand," he said, setting the wood near the hearth. His eyes, however, were fixed on her, and the intensity in his gaze made her heart skip. "Besides, there's no one else I'd rather impress than you." Clarissa's lips curved, and she stepped closer. "You've already done more than impress, Eli. You built a home, a life, and somehow me along with it." Her words trembled slightly, emotions raw beneath her carefully held composure. He stepped toward her, boots crunching on the porch boards, until the space between them seemed to hum with possibility. "You think this cabin was built for me?" he asked quietly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No, Clarissa. It's for us, for what we survived and what we found." The wind swept through the valley, carrying the scent of pine, earth, and rain-soaked grass, as if the mountains themselves were bearing witness to the moment. Clarissa's hand found his, fingers lacing naturally, hearts pounding in unison. "I laughed at your challenge," she murmured, eyes locked with his. "I thought it was impossible. I thought you were impossible. But I was wrong about both." Eli's hand lifted to cup her cheek, thumb brushing lightly across her skin. "You were wrong about me and about yourself," he said, voice low, intimate, carrying a weight of promise and trust. "You're stronger, braver, and just as wild as this land. And I'd be a fool not to make you mine." Clarissa's breath caught, and the corners of her eyes glimmered with tears not of sorrow, but of awe and surrender. "Then marry me," she whispered, the words fragile yet fierce. "If I can have a man like you, I'll give you everything." Eli's grin was slow, triumphant, and full of love. "Clarissa Montague, I built cabins, faced storms, and fought for land, but nothing in the world has been worth more than this moment." He knelt on one knee, pulling a small, rough-hewn ring from his pocket, carved from silver he had carried in his pack for months. "Will you marry me?" Tears fell freely now, and her laugh, a mixture of joy, relief, and wonder, rang out across the valley. "Yes, Yes, Eli Boone. I'll marry you. He rose, pulling her close, the warmth of his body against hers a balm for months of trials, sweat, and danger. Around them, the cabin glowed in the soft morning light, the mountains standing witness, the valley humming with life. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of sun, dust, and promise, a kiss that sealed their hearts and their future together. As they stood on the porch, hand in hand, the mountains stretched endlessly before them, wild and untamed, yet their hearts had found home. The cabin was more than wood and nails. It was love forged in challenged courage, and a promise kept under the vast, eternal sky of the west. The sun dipped low over the sprawling prairie, casting the cabin and surrounding hills in molten gold and shadow. A warm wind rustled through the tall sagebrush, carrying the faint scent of smoke from last night's fire and the sweet tang of wildflowers along the creek. Horses shifted and nicked in the corral, their hooves clattering against a wooden fence, mingling with the distant, muted strains of saloon piano carried on a breeze from the town below. Clarissa stood on the porch, the soft light painting her hair in streaks of amber and copper. Eli stepped up beside her, the weight of the past months in his broad shoulders, yet his eyes held only light, pride, relief, and love. The cabin behind them, sturdy and unshakable, had become more than timber and nails. It was an embodiment of their journey, of challenges faced, storms weathered, and hearts opened. He took her hand in his, rough and calloused, yet gentle, fingers entwining as naturally as if they had always belonged together. "We built more than a cabin," Eli said, voice low, husky with emotion. "We built a life. Together." Clarissa smiled, the breeze tugging at the corner of her dress, and leaned into him, forehead against his chest. "I think this is exactly where we're meant to be," she whispered. Above them, the sky burned crimson and violet, a final blaze of color before twilight draped the world in quiet serenity. They watched together as the last light fell across the mountains, hands tight, hearts unguarded, knowing that the trials and triumphs had led them here, to this perfect, unspoken promise. Eli pressed a kiss to her temple, murmuring, "You're my home, Clarissa, always." And for the first time in their lives, neither wanted to go anywhere else.